Hello, my name is Worden, and this is my presentation for my class, Our Nation of Incarceration, and this presentation is going to be about the juvenile justice system. So basically, to introduce what we're going to be talking about is, in our class, Our Nation of Incarceration, we talked about many topics regarding the prison system in the United States and some aspects outside of the United States. But the one that touched me the most was the juvenile justice system / injustice, because there's a lot of aspects about it that bother me that I kind of want to talk about today. So the basic highlights of what I'm going to talk about is the police and schools, socioeconomic status among youth, stick-up kids, and adolescent decision-making. First thing I want to talk about is one of the articles that we read in class. It's called How America Outlawed Adolescence. So, some facts and info for you guys is 1,200 kids a year are charged with disturbing the school instinct. And basically what that means is to disturb in any way or in any place the students or teachers of any school, or to act in an obnoxious manner. The charge, which has been placed on kids as young as 7 years old, is up to 90 days in jail or a $1,000 fine. And to me, that's insanely ridiculous to be picturing putting a 7-year-old in jail for 90 days, or making them / their parents pay $1,000. Especially when these kids that we're putting in jail don't usually have the best family resources as well, so that just makes it even more hard. Luckily, at least 22 states and dozens of cities have outlawed school disturbances, so a lot of states don't have this in effect, which is really nice, because we shouldn't be doing it. But basically the gist of what I pulled from this resource was that students at schools with police officers are significantly more likely to be reported to law enforcement. So just getting the gist of that, the more that there's police officer in schools, the more likely they're going to be exposed and around the law enforcement and the juvenile and jail system, and it's just kind of going to be a part of their lives. So my reflection on this was straight out of the article as well, but there's this one story about this girl. I think she was around middle school, high school age, and she was refusing to give up her phone to her teacher. So her teacher called in one of the police officers who worked there, and instead of handling it in a calm manner and just giving her fair consequences, he decided to rip her out of her desk, flipped her desk over, started to beat her and assault her, and students got this all on video, and it was a huge debacle, it was a huge event, and everyone was really upset about it. But the main thing about it is that she got charged with disturbing the school. Her and many other kids get the same charge, and to me this just sets up their future straight at adolescence. At the prime development of their lives, this is when we're sentencing them with jail convictions already, when we should be teaching them a better way instead of this is what you get. To me, I feel like this is kind of where we have teachers for. This is where teachers have the authority, where they should step in, take control of those situations, and try and make the students resolve that in a calm manner instead of getting law enforcement involved. But the gist of this in the honors dimension that I took apart from this was cultural intelligence, because it made me consider how different my school is from other schools, because I could never imagine a police officer coming into my school and ripping me out of my chair. That would be insane. We only had police officers at my school when it was absolutely necessary, and usually that would be in the cases of drug searches, or if there was something suspicious going on or around our campus and all that kind of stuff. So I could never imagine having just law enforcement roam the halls all hours of the day while we're in school. But that's the gist of what I got taken away from that resource. The next thing I want to talk about is how we're priming some kids for college and others for prison. Some facts and info on this aspect is that in the past 40 years, our incarceration rate has grown by 700%, and that's really crazy. The sad thing is that a lot of the juveniles that are going through this are poor, part of African American and Latino communities, and typically come from really disadvantaged neighborhoods with a lot of violence in them, and they have really limited family resources, as I stated before, so it's even more difficult for them. And we're making them go through all of these juvenile convictions, and on top of that, we're piling court fees on them. We're giving them parole and probation restrictions to add into their schedules and their life. And we're asking them to go under house arrest at such a young age, or having them live in halfway houses with other kids that, they don't know, that aren't their siblings, they didn't grow up with. And on top of all of that, we're also asking them to somehow avoid and stay out of trouble. And it's just hard when you have them in the most disadvantaged situations and we just keep piling it on for them, and then we're just asking them to stay out of scenarios like that. I remember one story we talked about in class that just came in my head about some kid who got charged and went to jail for years because he was riding in a stolen car that his brother bought from someone, or it was his girlfriend's or something. But long story short, they didn't know that this car was stolen, and just because he was riding passenger in it, he got sent to jail for it. And to me, it's just, how are we supposed to set kids up for success if that's the penalties we're going to give them? Yeah. So the reflection I got from this, mainly I pulled this away from Alice Kaufman's TED Talk that we watched in class, and I really loved, one of her quotes from it was the emphasis on justice, because I feel like we don't have a lot of justice in our incarceration system, especially when it comes to juveniles. And it was just really impactful to me to watch how emotional and passionate she got about this topic, and it made me get emotional watching her. Some aspects that I kind of tied into this topic that I was thinking about from previous classes that I've taken in my psychology major is Erikson's stages of development. One of those is about industry versus inferiority, and kind of the gist that I got from that was about how we prime kids for what they can achieve at a young age. They start to develop what they can and can't do based on the success trials that they go through and how we encourage success. So by putting kids in jail, we're kind of just deeming them as unsuccessful off the bat, and then we're making it also more difficult for them to get jobs once they get out of jail, because they lack extreme skill sets that they missed while they were doing their time. And then to even go to college after jail, they have to get their GED, or they have to finish school. There are kids that try and go, once they get out of jail, they try and go back to the school and finish that they started with. If they went to jail during senior year and they were away for a couple months, they'd try and go back and the school would deny them. And that's just, we're not setting them up for success in that way. So to me, that's kind of how it relates to industry and inferiority, because we're just priming them for what's yet to come. And another thing I kind of tied it to is sociology of deviance. There's a thing noted as Merton's strain theory, and something that kind of ties into is how the American dream is only attainable by some people, and that's basically the people who conform. The people who conform are the ones who work 9 to 5. They do the standard mode of succeeding based on what society wants us to do. So work, get higher in the ladder, make more money, have more success, buy a nicer house, have a family. That's the American dream. And the people who conform are more likely to achieve that. And then there are people who innovate, who don't want to conform to society's way of doing it. And those are the people who are drug dealers or prostitutes or scammers, or some people who are coming up with a different way to make that money to try and achieve that dream, but just not in the way that is acceptable. And that's why they're deemed as deviant. And that's what a lot of these juveniles are doing. And then there are also people who rebel and just go completely against the status quo and do their own thing. And those are usually people who are like offlanders and all that kind of stuff. But the way that I took this from honors dimension is interdisciplinary learning, just because I kind of tied in my own coursework into what we're learning about in class, and I thought it was really interesting. Another aspect I want to talk about is becoming a stick-up kid. And the background and story I'll give you guys about that is this guy named Randall Contreras. He wrote a book about stick-up kids called Stick-Up Kids: Race, Drugs, Violence, and the American Dream. Basically, his book and his study was about him going into the South Bronx. He was observing the drug context and the social context of, the drug area and the everything that ties into that socially, and just kind of watching how they all communicate and work together and what their lives are like. And at first he was really intimidated because these people came off, they were bragging about all the people that they killed and all the crimes they've committed and how dangerous they are. And the way that they rate their power is by how dangerous they are and how feared they are. So to Contreras, this was kind of threw him initially. And then one of the quotes that I took from his book that I really enjoyed was when he noted, "I took a step back to frame what seemed solely evil and sociopathic within a larger historical and social forces that sweep people in one direction or another, that shape why some people do violence or crime." So basically, when you're looking at these people who come off as this evil, deviant person, and you kind of view why they're this way and how they grew up to be this way, it just kind of changes your perspective on how you view them, and you look at them in kind of a more empathetic way than you would before. And that's something I feel like our justice system needs, a lot of empathy for sure. But the gist of his book, he talks about how daily cultural messages try to make Americans pursue the ultimate American dream, and a lot of people just do this through drugs. Alonzo Thomas is one of the prime stick-up kid stories that we talked about in class for sure. He was one of the first juveniles to ever be convicted of a crime, and he went to a California adult prison at the age of 16 for 10 years. And this was basically because he got in a fight with his mom. He ran away from home. He was on the streets. This old man took him in, fed him, gave him a place to stay. After he was there for a couple days, this old man puts a gun on the counter and tells him he has to go rob this gas station for him because he's not living and eating here for free. And this adolescent kid who has no idea if he's either gonna get in trouble robbing this gas station, or he's gonna die, or he's either one of those, so he has to make a decision. And he decided to go and rob it, gets caught, and goes to jail. He missed out on huge aspects of his adolescence, such as driving, going to prom, getting his high school degree or diploma, and getting a college degree. His brother was a pro football player, and he didn't get to go and watch his brother play pro football. He would have the prison guards get like the football statistics about his brother and read them to him and tell him while he's in his cell, because he knew that his brother is out there playing pro football and he can't even go and watch it. So that was just kind of a sad story to talk about. But this is kind of a long summation of Tucky's story that Randall was observing. He was one of the prime people in South Bronx that he was kind of observing all his time he was going undercover there. And the gist of his story is about how he grew up in the rise and the fall of the crack era in South Bronx, so it just led to the decline of inner cities, decline of manufacturing, misguided policies, and growing up in that context with a bad environment where everyone's turning to crack is becoming more popular. He just kind of learned how to distribute it, how to run from the police, how to be a successful criminal. And that's just what it's like in that environment. Like I said before, the way you gain your power there is by how feared you are. So just think about, you don't look at the kids who are going off to college at 18 as the kids who are doing the most or, being successful. You're looking at the guy who's most feared on the streets, and that's who you want to look up to as a kid, because that's the cool thing. That's what adolescents look for. And he just kind of fell into this, and it kind of made me consider leadership development, which is one of the aspects or dimensions of honors learning. Just because I feel like Tucky had to know that what he was doing was cruel. Like he wasn't born a torturer. He wasn't, made to be that way, but he just kind of fell into the context and the structure of being that way because that's what he deemed as normal. He had to know what he was doing was unethical and wrong, but I feel like he did this just because he felt motivated by the power that he could gain because of it. And then once you start gaining that power and people start respecting you more, that just gives you more motivation to keep it going. So that's what I took away from this. Last thing I want to talk to you guys about today is a Decade in Review article that I read. So it was everything about the past year, 2021. The one that I read was mainly focused about adolescent decision making. And something that I just thought was really cool that they mentioned was about the juvenile system, and it was saying that psychologists and lawmakers are looking into extending the practices and the protections against juveniles into young adulthood. So they're basically just saying that they want to extend the juvenile age. And the National Academics of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine, their current view is that they want to change the age from 10 to 25. And to me that kind of makes sense because the brain doesn't fully stop developing until roughly 25-ish. And so, I mean, to me it's just kind of like we're at the same level of thinking. It's just a different age, and it's the way that it's always been is that 18 is the cutoff into adulthood, and that's when we get all of our responsibility. But then we also can't drink until we're 21, and so there's just a whole debate on that. And there's also another stat in here that was talking about how long-term consequences, such as criminal convictions, were seen to be interpreted the same among 13 and 17-year-olds, or minors, as it was for 18 to 24-year-olds. So they view long-term consequences exactly the same. So that means that when this 13-year-old decides to go rob the drugstore and they get sent to jail, or this 25-year-old decides to go and rob the drugstore and then get sent to jail, they view that consequence the same. They know exactly what they're getting into and they're doing. So, what I have to reflect on that is just kind of, to me, I don't see much difference between the age gap from 18 and 25. I feel like extending it wouldn't be a bad idea. It would be very progressive, and it's probably going to be really controversial. It's going to take a lot of work to get it there, but to me it's interesting that the past decade is even considering that. I feel like a lot of the time we expect our youth, or we claim youth to be incapable of making rational, thought-making decisions when we know that they're capable. There's studies that say that decision-making in the brain is exactly the same when you're in adolescence and when you're an adult. The only thing is that adolescents are more reward-based, so that's why they're gonna rob the drugstore, because they're not gonna get killed. That's the better reward. You know, they're gonna go and they're gonna sell crack on the streets because they're gonna get more money out of that than working a couple hours at the diner at night and stuff like that. That's why they're gonna make worse decisions. So, but it's not very different into the age of 25 as well. So to me, I don't consider it much different. I don't think it would be a bad idea, but that's the basic gist I got of that. The dimension that I applied to this is information fluency, just because I was analyzing deeper issues outside of class in this decade in review and how decision making can tie into incarceration and the juvenile system. So that's how I used information fluency with that. All right, conclusion. Hope for the future. I hope so. A couple things that I just kind of considered would make our juvenile system better is taking unnecessary police out of schools. I feel like, sometimes there are cases where it is okay and necessary to have police in schools, such as drug searches and, if there's something going on in the school, that type of thing, like big events. Like, it makes sense to me in that case. But to have police officers kind of like intimidating these kids and giving them this impression like they have this macho sense of authority over them is just sometimes not the best way that we can introduce that into their lives, to me, in my opinion. I also know that there was a huge debate kind of back in 2021 about how we want to give teachers guns and kind of let it be okay to have guns in school for the right of protection. And to me, that just seems wrong in a way. I feel like I'm nothing wrong against guns, but to me, I feel like bringing them into school is just going to make kids more receptive to them and think that they're more approachable, and I feel like it's just better to keep guns away from children. It seems pretty logical to me. I also want to consider focus on priming kids for college, rehab, counseling, instead of juvie. This is mainly just because I feel like sending kids to juvie is just keeping them in a cell and taking them away from those prime years of their development is not something that's going to help benefit them in the future. We should be making college a reality to them, and as well as getting a job, we should be helping them build those resources and skills, and basically making this so that even if they do go to juvie and they get out, it's still something that's in their cards. It's accessible to them. And yeah, stop seeing one side of the story, such as Tucky. I mean, obviously, first initial look, he's a pretty scary guy, but when you start to realize who he really is, you kind of start to view the deeper side of his story and how he got to where he is, and that kind of I feel like we can look at that as more of a precautionary thing, as to where we can view people in this context and kind of help set them up for success before they start getting into this narrative of being a stick up kid. And also to consider how risky decision making in adolescence can extend into young adulthood, and possibly how that decade in review is going to proceed in the following years, and if we might see a change in the juvenile time frame or age frame. All right. These are my sources. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I can't wait to watch everybody else's presentation, and I really enjoyed this class. I hope you learned something good from my slideshow today and from me rambling on about it. Have a good night. I will see you guys in class tomorrow.